Hello everyone, I'm Mohsen. Hello from Canada, from Vancouver for you. I hope you are doing well. Today we have another great session with James about Azure Data Factory. And before I will add James in the stage to start the presentation, let me share some information with you. We are Microsoft Zero to Hero. We are part of Microsoft Learning Community. As you know, Microsoft Learning Community is a collection of content, learning content, based off the role, based off your certification, and there are many learning content, and you can join from ak.ms Microsoft Learn community and enjoy from this content. Actually, we have two exciting calendar. This is August calendar for Microsoft Zero to Hero. We are a lot of exciting session, and we previous session, all of them uploaded in our YouTube channel. You can join and watch the previous session. And this is a September 0 calendar. And then finally, our code of conduct: be aware of other, be friendly and passionate, be welcoming and respectful, be open to all question and viewpoint, be understanding of difference, be kind and considerate to other in the chat, or comment or question. The time is to add James in the stage. Hello, James.
Hi there.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. I have to say, I think I've just checked my heart rate. It's nearly 200, so I might talk fast.
Yeah, nice, great. And you can add your session and start your presentation. It's great. The topic is very great. The Azure Data Factory. I like these tools.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good tool for all people, all sizes of business as well. You can even if it's just you on your own, you can get a lot of use out of it. So it's a good, very
Yeah.
good tool.
Yeah, great. Just for your information and our participants, they can ask their question. End of the session, we will answer their question. And actually, we can select best question as a winner for Microsoft exam voucher, 50%, fundamental and advanced. And end of the session, we will select best question as a winner.
Perfect.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. So let's see how this goes. If I can share my screen. We go entire screen from there. So hopefully you can now see my screen.
Yeah, we have.
That's good. Perfect. So, right. So, good morning or afternoon, everybody, or evening, depending on when you're watching this as well on YouTube, following back. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to dive into a topic that's becoming increasingly crucial in our data-driven world, which is streamlining data integration. Specifically, we're going to explore how Azure Data Factory can help us to build efficient data pipelines. So whether you're dealing with data silos, complex ETL processes, or if you're struggling to scale up, you should find value in what we're about to discuss today. And by the end of this session, you'll have a solid understanding of Azure Data Factory and how it can address many of your common data integration challenges. Right, so first of all, I'll go through this quickly because we're here about the topic, not about me. My name's James Reeves. I go by pronouns he, him. I am, first of all, a husband, father, son, brother. I'm a human being. I'm also a Power BI consultant. I set up a company called Power BI Limited years and years and years ago. I since folded that, but I still have the Power BI Limited as my LinkedIn title, I guess, or LinkedIn link. So if you want to find me, that's where you can find me, or email me on james@bedrockdata.uk, which is my current business. I'm a passionate advocate for empowering others. This is why I do these talks, so we can help everyone to empower themselves, get things done. I big advocate for mental health awareness to make sure the old days where people were judged or not understood, hopefully we can move away from those, but also be understanding ourselves to understand why sometimes we need to do certain things for our own protection. And lastly, I'm an advocate for donating blood, plasma, and bone marrow. It takes, for bone marrow donation, what I like to say is it takes 2 minutes to register with a company like DKMS. You can swab you inside your mouth. What's that, 45 seconds? Well, 45 seconds maybe to register, 30 seconds to do the swab, and 45 seconds to send it off. That's 2 minutes. Check the maths, but it should be 2 minutes. And you can save someone's life in that time. So please do. And the old days of bone marrow donation being actually quite a painful process, it isn't anymore. It's almost completely the same as donating blood. It's very easy, and you can genuinely save lives. So please do register if you are able to do. People from diverse genetic backgrounds are particularly desired, because if you think about it, if you need bone marrow of a particular genetic background, then someone of that same background has to have donated it. So please, if you can, do. So with that, I was going to say I'm a principal consultant and co-founder of an independent data consultancy called Bedrock Data, and we help clients across various sectors to design, develop, and deliver data-driven solutions that are optimal for their business performance and outcomes. I've got 20 years of experience, or over 20 years of experience in data management analytics, mostly with deep expertise and certifications in Microsoft technologies. I'm also passionate about sharing my knowledge and skills with data community. So we organise a group called Bedrock Tech Talks. They are a monthly virtual Teams call where we get experts from the community to come and share their knowledge. We also do an in-person one in Chester in the UK. If you're ever in the area, that's also monthly. You can find them both on Meetup. Right. So this is what we're going to cover in today's session. We'll start by discussing some of the common challenges in data integration. This will help you set the context for why tools like Data Factory are so valuable. We'll introduce Data Factory itself, what it is, why you might want to use it, and we're going to explore its key features and components, hopefully to give you a solid foundation understanding how it works. So throughout the session, I'll be giving live demonstrations, because it's all very well talking about it, but actually seeing it used is how I learn anyway. So we'll see how it works in practice. We're going to build some data pipelines, and towards the end, I'll discuss best practices and optimization techniques. These will help you get the most out of Azure Data Factory in your own projects, hopefully. And at the very end, we'll have a Q&A session. Ask any questions you might have. So don't hesitate to jot down your questions as we go along. I am here to help you understand the tool and how it can benefit your work. Okay, so why is data integration such a challenge? Many of you have probably encountered these issues in your own work. So we have data silos is a very common one. In many organizations, data is scattered across various systems. Could be HR system, could be a sales system, could be operational system, and the data is scattered. So the fragmentation makes it difficult to get a holistic view of your data and to how to get meaningful insights, and if you can't see across the whole. Then there's complexity of ETL. So just to make sure we all know what we're talking about, ETL is extract, transform, and load. You may also see extract, load, and transform, which is actually my preference usually. And there's some other acronyms, but ETL is kind of global. Now, doing things with data can be time consuming to develop the routines and to maintain them and to make sure they're robust so they don't fail, or at least be made aware of when they fail so you don't have the worst kind of failure is a silent failure. So as your data needs evolve, you need to keep on top of all of that. Data consistency is another major headache. When you're pulling data from multiple places, ensuring it's consistent and accurate is a significant challenge. So as your data volumes grow, scalability becomes a concern. Systems that work well with a small data set might struggle when you scale up and you're starting to deal with a lot of big data. And streaming data is another one where some of the more traditional tools or your older tools, they just don't deal with streaming data very well. And Azure Data Factory, which I'll refer to as ADF going forward, it does. It's really good at all of those kind of things. On that note, there's an increasing demand these days for real-time data integration. So in today's fast-paced world, waiting hours or days for data to be processed often just isn't an option. So that's exactly what Azure Data Factory is designed to address. So let's look how it does that. So what is it? So at its core, it's a cloud-based data integration service. It's provided by Microsoft and it's part of the Azure ecosystem. I think of it as a Swiss Army knife for basically anything data integration needed. A lot of it has been referred to, I've heard it referred to as SSIS in the cloud, and it is to an extent, but way more powerful and scalable. But you still connect to local if you want to. That's fine. We'll talk about how to do that later as well. So if you've got stuff on your network, how do you get it into the cloud? We'll talk about that. So Data Factory lets you create data-driven workflows that orchestrate and automate data movement and data transformation. So it's a pipeline you set up, or a set of things you set up that take data from one place, possibly do something to it, that would be the transform, and land it in another place. The data transformation, you have multiple ways of doing it. I will show a little bit, but as I say, it's not something I actually prefer to land the data and then transform it afterwards, because it means that if I ever need to rerun my data processes, I don't have to get it from the source system again. And also it might not be available from the source system in the same way after the point. So I like to land it and have it as a reference. So let's break down key capabilities of Azure Data Factory. Firstly, as I've said, is data ingestion. It can connect to a wide variety of data sources, both cloud-based, not just Microsoft. It can connect to SAP or SAP, never really sure how to say that one, and web services, Salesforce, all of these things can be connected to, but also your on-premise SQL servers, file stores, systems. It can connect to them to ingest the data. The data transformation, once you've ingested it, ADF does have tools to clean, get rid of, you might know there's certain rows you need to get rid of or certain columns you need to get rid of. Transform, so you can add column to another column to make a new column, do calculations on the fly, and reshape the data. So if your data is very long and actually it needs to be wide, you can do it all in ADF. And the final part is data publishing. So once you've got your data in, you've done whatever you want to do to it, you now need to put it somewhere. And ADF can output to various destinations where it can then be picked up by other services or applications. The final piece actually is, a lot of it's about moving data, but the ADF brings to the table comprehensive monitoring and management. So you can keep an eye on your data pipelines, ensure they're running smoothly and efficiently. And all of these capabilities together create a powerful tool, which is really flexible for pretty much all of your data integration needs. So you might be wondering, why ADF over other options? And there are a number of other options. So let's address that next. There are several compelling reasons why I usually choose ADF. First and foremost, it's a fully managed platform as a service. So if you see PaaS written down when you're online, that's what it means, platform as a service. That means that you don't have to worry about maintaining the infrastructure behind it all or applying software updates. Microsoft handles all of that. So you can just focus on your data integration tasks. It also means that any enhancements to how the whole thing works, they just come to you automatically. Now, in my many years of using it, I've never heard of a breaking change where Microsoft changed the way it works and things break. Never heard of it. They do it in such a way that it adds features rather than removing or changing features, really. Or it might change things behind the scenes, but it doesn't break. That's one of the good things, one of the many good things. So ADF also excels at hybrid data integration. It can seamlessly connect between the cloud and your on-premise, which is crucial for many organizations where if your company is taking over another company and you have two completely separate networks, you don't really want to migrate anything or integrate. Well, ADF doesn't force you to. You can just pick from that network, and it will work. And one of the standout features is it's user friendly, which includes, I've put low code. For the vast majority of the time you interact with ADF, it's actually no code. You don't need to write any code. You can, and you can. It can be useful to, but you don't have to. Which means that even team members who don't have extensive coding experience, they can contribute and build and manage data pipelines. So it's good to bring. I'm not saying all end users can use ADF, but they could probably understand it if you show it to them, and possibly you allow them to set up some pipelines that are simple for themselves. It helps to automate certain things, but generally I see it used as an enterprise tool where en masse we want to take data from here, put it there on a regular basis. It's usually a central function, but it doesn't have to be, because it is actually quite user-friendly. And the other thing is you don't have to have a single data factory for your whole enterprise. You can have multiple. You can have multiple in a single resource group. You can have then you can have more in across your subscription. And you could just spin one up with limited pipelines, but that belongs to someone, and they look after that. And that's actually best practice sometimes. If you have a team that is capable of managing their own pipelines, let them. Saves it being a centralized function. Then if there is a problem, maybe a data source has changed or their needs have changed, if you have enabled your departments to do it, then it is no longer an IT demand. They can just fix it themselves. Obviously, you have to choose what's right for you and your organization, because that might not be appropriate, or it might be completely appropriate. And that's one of the things I love about ADF. It's flexible. So it's built to handle big data integration. It can scale to accommodate terabytes. It can handle large volumes of data. It makes it suitable for enterprise level data processing. With over 90 built-in connectors, it can integrate with just about anything. It's a massively wide array of data sources and data destinations. So whether you're working with databases, whether you're working with file storage, SaaS applications, or other types of data stores, ADF's probably got a connector for it. And the last piece is that ADF actually integrates seamlessly with other Azure services. So it makes it really easy to build comprehensive end-to-end data solutions within the Azure ecosystem. I'll show some of that today. Right, so now that we understand what ADF is and why I think it's a very good choice for your data integration needs, let's dive into its key components. So it's built around several key components. People tend to talk about the first three, maybe four, but I'd like to list them as, these six are really the foundations of Data Factory. So first, we have pipelines. I mentioned it earlier, where I hadn't actually just explained what they are, so let's do that. They are the highest level unit in ADF. A pipeline is essentially a logical grouping of activities that together perform a task. Think of a pipeline as a container or a folder for organizing your data integration workflow, really. Within pipelines, you have activities. So they're the fundamental actions in Data Factory. So an activity represents a process. If you have a process guide, the guide is probably the pipeline, and the steps within that guide are the activities. An activity represents, like say, a processing step in your pipeline. This could be copying data, transforming data, executing a stored procedure on SQL somewhere, or many other things. There's lots of different activities, and we'll have a look at those. The next piece is data sets. They represent data structures within your data stores. They point to or reference the data you want to use as an input or output for the activities. Now, very closely, I'm going to say linked, but linked service kind of makes sense. So very closely tied to data sets are linked services. So they are essentially connection strings, really, that define the connection information that Data Factory needs to connect to external resources. So they could be stores like Azure Data Lake or a SQL database, or actually it's not just data stores, it could be compute resources. So you can connect to Azure Databricks, start a cluster, process a notebook, close the cluster. So you can do orchestration of that in ADF. You can do it in Databricks as well, but it's just another option. If you wanted all your orchestration in one place, it is possible. And so when you have linked services to external resources that are non-cloud, you can make use of integration runtimes because they provide the bridge that allows ADF to access the data in different network environments. They provide the compute infrastructure for data movement and transformation, and for dispatching activities to various compute services. So if you think of it, I describe it as a bridge, but it actually, I need a better analogy because it does the work. It's not just a bridge, it's also the machine that you can pick data up and push it up to the cloud. So if anyone can think of a better analogy than bridge, please let me know. Now, finally, we have triggers. They determine when a pipeline execution should be kicked off. So you can set up triggers based on the time, or you can do it in response to events. And time, there's actually two different ways. You can do at 5 o'clock every day, I want this to happen. Or you can say a rolling 60 minutes or rolling 30 minutes. Or, you can do a rolling period of time, and it will just roll to the next period. Because otherwise, let's say you wanted a 6 o'clock, a 12 o'clock, and a 6 p.m. and a midnight activity. That would be 4 triggers if you did per time, or you'd have to specify 4 times within that trigger. Might actually be better just to specify run every 6 hours, and it would achieve the same thing, or run every 5th day. There's lots of variants there, and that's why I like it, because it's so flexible. You can make it fit what your needs are. Although I do have to admit, I get it wrong every time. When I try and do something on a daily basis, I choose day when I should be choosing week, because a daily basis it's hour based, minute based, but on a weekly basis it's day based. So I always get that one wrong. So hopefully, me giving you that heads up, you won't get that wrong, but you might be the same as me. Doesn't cause any problems, just means you have to do an extra couple of clicks when you figured it out. So in the next section, we're going to look more closely at the types of activity you can use in your pipeline. So the activities in ADF fall into 3 main categories, I think, which is data movement, data transformation, and control activities. So data movement activities are used to copy data from one location to another. The primary activity, which is used every day, the very first time you come to Data Factory, you're probably going to use a copy activity, because that's what you want to do. You want to copy data from here and put it there. It's incredibly versatile. It can move data between, I think it's more than 80 data stores now, between cloud-based and on-premises. Data transformation activities allow you to transform and enrich your data. So a key feature here is mapping data flow. It's a fully visual, code-free way to design data transformations. Other transformation activities include running Hive queries on a HD Insight cluster, or executing Spark programs. I've mentioned it 10 times. It's flexible, which makes it very hard to do a 1 hour talk because there's so many things I could show you. So I'm going to try and stick to just a core set. And like I say, please ask questions at the end, or get in contact with me if you want to know about something in particular. So the last one is control activities. So they help you control the flow of your pipeline. For example, there is a for each, which allows you to iterate over a collection. So if you have you can say, go to a folder and iterate through each file within that folder. And you can say, actually, that folder contains CSVs and JSON files. Just iterate through the CSVs. You can be that specific. You can be more specific. You can say, actually, just go through the CSVs that start with a particular character. So it's very very powerful what you can do in just very small configuration changes. So it allows you to iterate over a collection, however you define that collection, and perform a set number of things on them, which you define. The if condition, that allows you to do branching logic in your pipeline. So you get the file, if or a data set, and if it has been indicated. So let's say you've got data from SQL, and you've got a column that says this is a customer-based information or HR-based information. The if clause can be, you can get it. The if condition can do different things. So it can read the data, and based on whatever conditions, you can create different branches. So your pipeline, it becomes multi-capable. It's not a single pipeline can do a single thing. You can actually do a pipeline that maybe you do a different thing on a Friday compared to a Thursday, or you do a different thing if the data is over a certain size. Maybe that you want to break that into two. It's very configurable. So understanding these activity types is crucial for designing effective data pipelines, because you're going to be using them all the time. So speaking of which, let's look at Azure Data Factory in action, and we'll build a simple pipeline together. So I'm going to log into the Azure portal, and then I'm going to go into the Data Factory instance. So I've created a demo environment. So in the Data Factory Studio, is what it's actually called. It's where you spend most of your time. If you're working with ADF, you're going to be in the studio. And I'll show you. I'll show you now. That makes more sense. Let's have a look. There we go. So hopefully you are now seeing my browser. And right, so we're in the Azure portal, and I'm going to navigate to my Data Factory, which is here. I could also type Data Factory in here and find it. There's many ways you can get around the Azure portal. We're not going to cover all those today. But for today, let's go to the actual Data Factory, which is here. As you can see, it says Launch Studio. There are quick starts and tutorials, training modules, all accessible from here, plus template galleries. They're really useful. I will show you. I'll show you them, but we're not going to use any today. I'm going to show you a different type of template, which we're going to use today. Okay, so we're now in the Data Factory, and this is your homepage. If you look to the left, you'll see the main menu. So it's where you access all the different parts of ADF. So you got your, it's called Author, Monitor, Manage, and the Learning Center. Actually, I didn't know the Learning Center was there. That's a new one for me. When you use something all the time, sometimes you just don't notice a new icon pop up. Right, so let's go into the in the center we have our main workspace, but let's go here. So we're now in the authoring mode, which if you have a look at everything that's around, you've got pipelines at the very top, and that's a container for all pipelines you might create. Data sets, which we spoke about, which are your we define what the data set is. Data flows is the mapping data flow I mentioned. I didn't mention Power Query, which maybe I will next time. But if you have Power Query in Power BI as an example, or Excel as an example, you can actually copy that. It's the same thing that you can bring up into Data Factory. So that's a good, if you're doing transformations in Power BI or Excel now, and you wanted to make it more enterprise level, you could actually copy it and you do it here instead. But we're not doing that today. Right, so we're going to go to pipelines. And like I said, this represents a grouping of activities. We don't have any at the moment. So we'll create one in a moment. And data sets, remember, they represent the data structures. And link services, which are on this page. They're on this page here. So on manage, we have our link services. So remember, they were our connection strings. So bear with me 2 seconds. Nope. Sorry. It's messing up my flow. Okay. We are going to go to the next slide. Apologies, everybody. Right, here we go. So we're going to create a pipeline now. It's just going to be a simple pipeline. So we'll go here. And the good thing is you don't have to do things in a certain order. You can create a link service and you can create a data set and then you can create a pipeline. That's, if you know what you want to do, probably the right order of activity. But if you're exploring or following a tutorial, you can actually do it a different way, which I'll show you now. Right, so it's quite a straightforward process. So let's create a new pipeline. So we'll click on the 3 dots and we'll do a new pipeline. Just to show you, there is an option for one for building it from a template. So there's a lot of, well, I'll just show you them. There's, I don't know how many there is. There's a lot of templates that if you have a particular need, come and search for it. That, you know, there might be a template for you to do, to use, sorry, make use of. There is a particularly good one, which is getting data out of SQL, and it creates the metadata table you need to be able to control the whole of the ADF process. I really like that one because it means that actually if you've got people who are SQL skilled, because Data Factory is going to the SQL to determine when to run, what to do with it, you can actually let people who are SQL skilled do that bit, and they never have to come near Data Factory if they don't need to. You can separate the duties. So, right, new pipeline. I'm going to click here. I'm going to click on new pipeline. It has a generic name of pipeline 1. If you click over here, you can see it. We can call it what we want. So I'm just going to call it simple pipeline. You can put spaces in. I choose not to. I just find a few times it's been better not to have special characters or anything like that. So use camel case would be my recommendation. But what's really cool is this related. It tells you if it relates to anything. So if there's another pipeline that calls this pipeline, it will show up here. So you don't need to go and click everything and work out what's connected. You can go to the one you're interested in and see where is this being called. I think it's just a nice nice added thing that you don't have to go looking, or you don't have to maintain a list yourself as well. Right, so what we want to do, we are going to do something very simple. I said it was the most commonly used, and this one's going to be copy data. So I'm going to drag that across. So I just typed in copy to limit it. I could have just searched for it. So move and transform, you've got your copy data, you've got your data flow. This shows you all the other things you can do. Now, interesting thing, if you define a Power Query routine, you can call it in a pipeline. So these things are connected. So your pipelines can call a data flow. It can call a Power Query. So when I say call, it basically means run it. So having the flexibility of all three different ways of doing things is super powerful. Right, what we're going to do, we can see here that I've just dropped in a copy data. Again, it gets a default name. I don't know why they always put 1 on the end. That's minor annoyance. But there we go. I like to call it copy data with no number, just a personal preference. You've got some settings. We're not going to touch those today, but the first one, just to say that timeout is the first digit is days, and then it's hours, minutes, seconds. A lot of people they forget that first one is days, and the timeout isn't set up properly. You can say, actually, when we're trying to copy data, I want you to, if we have any failures, that might be a network issue, or some other reason why it might fail, you can say, right, retry. Maybe you don't know a file's going to be there, for example, and you say, right, try 3 times, but give it a 60-second interval in between each, just because when it arrives, we'll pick it up. There is another way of doing it where you can set your trigger to actually be when a file gets put in this location, then run it. Now, that's the better way of doing it. But if you're picking it up from a source where you can't set that up, the retry is really useful. There we go. And secure output and secure input. That is, if you, in your logging, if you've got passwords being passed in text, if you do secure output input, it means that they are not put into the logs. So that can be very useful as well. Although I would recommend you shouldn't be having passwords anyway. You can connect Data Factory to Key Vault to store your passwords and secrets. Right. So we need a source. So source is where you're getting the data from, and sink, it's unusual terminology, but it's where we're going to put the data. So let's start off with source. I haven't got anything configured at the moment. So it's a completely fresh Data Factory install. So the good thing, like I said, is we can do it in a different order. I want to start with a pipeline, then the activity, and I'm going to configure the dataset now. So the dataset I need is Azure Data Lake Storage, generation 2, and it's actually a CSV file. I'm going to pick that up, and I'm just going to really simply move it. There are best practices for naming things. I like, if I'm creating a data set, start it with DS. It's completely optional. You don't have to. We do have to end it with a letter or a number. So I'm going to call up this source file. And there's no link service because I haven't created that either. So again, I can do it here. So I'm going to create an Azure Data Lake link service. And I'm going to configure it as the source. I mean, these names don't have any impact. Just name it something that makes sense for you to understand what they're doing in the future. So by default, it tries to set up with an account key. Actually, best practice I find for Azure Data Factory is to try and configure it to use managed identity throughout. So you're not worrying about passwords or anything like that. And so I can say, right, go to this storage account I've already set up. And what I always do as well is test the connection, make sure it's okay. Prior to this demo, I set up things so you have to set up certain permissions. So when you set up Azure Data Factory by default, it doesn't actually have the rights to talk to the storage account or SQL Server or anything like that. You have to go in and grant those permissions. What's quite nice about ADF these days, I don't think you used to do this, is how to set up the right permissions is there right in front of you when you're setting it up. Now I've already done that. I've already granted the access. So this is a link service to Azure Data Lake, and it's going to be for my source. Yeah, actually, let's just call it Azure Data Lake. That'll be easier. Right, there we go. Right, so we're back now. So the link service has been created. So we're now back in the data set. And the simplest way I find is to browse. So we're going to go to source data, and I'm going to pick that particular file. Okay, and we're not going to import a schema on this one. It's just a simple file. Okay, so that's it. We've set up a data set and a link service, and we've told copy data to make use of that. It's all configured already. It's the way to go. Now, when I configured the data set, I actually did it all the way down to a file. I could have just done it to the folder and specified the file name in here, which would make it more generic, and you can use it in for each loops and things like that. So the way I've just set up that data set, that data set, it's just for that file, but it's easy for a demo. Right. So there's not a lot to check here for a simple file. You can preview the data to make sure that you can connect. So look at that. There we go. So it's just a simple CSV file, and we need to put it somewhere. So I've got a dataset source file, but so if I had set that dataset to be not a specific file, maybe we could have reused it, but we didn't. So good reason to be reusable. So it's going to be CSV again, and we're going to call it DS destination file, and we're going to use the ADLS. We don't need to make it again, but we are going to specify a different folder. So we're going to put it in destination data. Now at the moment there are no files in there. Again, we're going to turn off the import schema. Okay, it would work, but we just don't need it. And we're specifying that the first row in the file has a header. We specified that on the other one as well. I forgot to mention it. And that really is it. We've now set up the ability to copy the data from there and push it there. The default, we can change behavior. So we can merge files together. So if two CSVs, and it will stack, it'll make a new, it will copy the data and put it in the destination CSV. Or there's other options in there as well. You can decide if it's a big file, you can do it in chunks, and you'd have to experiment with what's optimal for you. So it's to optimize throughput and things like that. So in this case, it's going from ADLS storage to ADLS storage. So there's not really much to configure. But I will configure, actually, it's a .csv. It's actually ignored anyway because we've specified the output name in this data set. If it wasn't, it would append this to the end. Right. We're not going to touch mapping because this is nice and simple, and we're actually just going to debug. So what the great thing is when you're building pipelines is you can just debug as you go along, see if it works, check for errors. If there are any errors, obviously you can fix them. And we're just going to prove that we can pick data up from place 1 and put it in place 2. So I didn't focus too much on it, but when we set up the destination data set, it said there was no files in there. So we're in source data now. So if I go to destination data, okay, it's done. It put the data in. So look, there we go. And we can see various things. We can see how many files it read, how many bytes it was. These don't necessarily match up, weirdly. And it could be because if your source hard drive, let's say it's on a local machine, is configured in a certain way so that files are stored in certain chunks, when it gets written to the cloud, actually, it will write the same amount, but the file might actually be the same size. So just want to check that. It tells you what your throughput was and how long it took. Things like that. So this can be really useful sometimes for troubleshooting when something's taken a long time. Well, what's taking the time? Actually, the source. So if you're going from SQL to SQL, which is quite common, an on-premise SQL server to a cloud SQL server, it's common actually that you can read data faster than you can write it, possibly. So it's useful to know that, because then what you can do is you can write it to blob as an intermediate step. And then that enhance and gets you off gets your connection to the link server terminated quicker. Right. So that worked. There's not a lot to say about it, really. You can see all these things here. We can say we took from, this is what the settings were when it ran on the input and the output. and you can copy them to clipboard if you ever want to show them to anybody. Most people don't, but so there's lots of information available. That's a simple pipeline. So I'm going to save that. Now to save it, I'm going to publish it. So before it's published, this is only for me. So if someone else logged into this same data factory, they wouldn't see this pipeline. It's for me to see at the moment. The moment I hit publish, it's going to push those files so they're available for everybody to see. You also can't set things up on a routine until they're published. So the trigger, which is how often things run, it needs a published pipeline to work against. So that's it. That is a simple pipeline. Not a lot else to show on that. Yes, right. That's what we've just done. Now I didn't use parameters. I'll talk about them rather than showing them because I think I'm running a little bit slower than I thought. So I'll talk about them in a moment. So what it means, that's a simple pipeline. But now we're going to look at the more powerful feature, which is data flows. They provide a fully visual way to design data transformations without having to write any code. With data flows, you can create complex ETL logic using the graphical interface. So you can drag and drop, and it's quite easy and straightforward to do. You simply add the source data sets, you add the transformations you want to do, and you specify the destination for the transformed data. What's great is they're not just for simple transformations. You can perform complex things like joining data sets together, aggregating data, pivoting the data, creating derived columns. And you can do all that without writing a single line of code, which is super powerful. Another key advantage is scalability. So when you run a data flow, it generates Spark code and executes it on a scalable Spark cluster. So it means your transformation can handle as much as you want to put it. Basically, it will scale up, and you don't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure. It's handled. So we touched on what control flows are. I just want to reiterate those really. Is the for each is used when you want to perform the same set of activity for each item in a collection. So you might use for each to process multiple files in a directory, i.e. go and get all of the 5 files that were generated today. So you can actually access the metadata of, get me the ones which were changed today. So that's good for iterative data loads. And then apply the same transformation to each thing you've picked up. The if condition allows you to create the branching logic in your pipeline. So based on a condition you specify, your pipeline takes different paths. So it's useful when you need to handle different scenarios or data conditions. What I didn't mention earlier is the until activity. So that creates a loop that repeats until a condition is met. So this can be helpful when you need to keep performing an action until a certain state is achieved. What that state is, you define yourself. And the final one is the web activity. It allows you to make HTTP calls from within your pipeline. So you can talk, anything you can do on the web, you can do, basically. So it's particularly useful if you've got REST APIs. It allows you to incorporate them into your data integration process. So these control flow activities, these 4 really are your core ones. And they give you the flexibility to create sophisticated dynamic data integration workflows. I'll show you how we can use those in a more advanced pipeline. So we've got a demo where we pull data from a Power BI REST API, and we save that data down to Azure Blob Storage. It's designed to fail, so we can look at some debug information. There's not enough time in the demo to actually fix it, but I will point you to the resource that the template comes from at the end. And so if you have a need to extract Power BI data and land it, there's a great guide for you to follow. If you don't want to follow a guide, we actually provide those services at Bedrock Data. So give us a shout if you want a hand. We can help you set it up, or we can manage it for you. Right. So let me show you that. Let's go across to that. There we go. So the first time I created a pipeline, I actually created a pipeline, new pipeline. The way I'm going to do this instead, is to use a pipeline from a template. So I can either use, sorry, wrong one, there. Now, weirdly, and I've just fallen foul of it myself, which I do every time, these are your three options. What I want to do is a different option, which is pipeline, which is import from pipeline template rather than template gallery. Now, this is a zip file that I have downloaded from GitHub that basically pre-configures everything, which is amazing. So your for each activity is set, your copy activity is set. I'll show you the rest in a minute. Now, we don't have a REST API there, so let's create it. And and let's have a look. So the activity is here. This is the link I was going to show you later. So there's a guy called Just has written some really good articles, really good blog posts on how to extract Power BI activity. There's lots of others. Just has posted some of them here. There's lots of different ways of doing the same thing. One that's not mentioned on here is I forget the name. I'll remember it and post it if anyone's interested. So you have to do some configuration. So by default, Power BI, you can't connect to it using service principal. So the data factory is managed identities. It's also known as a service principal. So you have to turn that on, and you have to create a security group. And I've done all those things and changed some settings, but these are the bits I want here. So that's the base URL I'm going to set up, which is here, and the AAD resource, which is here. So first of all, I have to say I'm not doing an authentication basic. I'm doing the system assigned managed identity, and this just tells it where to go get that from. And if I do a test connection, it will show that actually this is connecting. It's okay. So again, best practice, name your link services something meaningful. And actually, I mentioned parameters, so let's do parameters now. So I'm going to create a base URL parameter, and I'm going to create a enter resource. You can call these what you want. The names don't matter all that much. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that same field in there. And then instead of typing it in, I'm going to do dynamic content. So base URL. And in here, same thing. I'm going to do dynamic content from enter resource. So essentially what that's doing is, rather than hard typing the link or the information in there and in there, it's picking it up from a parameter. Now, I've given these parameters default values, the same thing. But the benefit of that is and you can retest, and there's no reason it won't work because we already tested it. But what you see there, actually, when it makes the connection, it goes and gets what value shall I pass to base URL and what value should I pass to enter resource. So you can make a link service that is dynamic. So you can make a link service to a Azure SQL Server, and rather than configuring it to be to a particular database, you can make the database a parameter so that when you are running a pipeline, you at runtime decide which database you're going to pick up from and which database you're going to drop to. It could be the same as a table. You can actually define pretty much anything can be defined as a parameter, and then it makes these things reusable. That's definitely a best practice. There we go. So, for example, when I created the Azure Data Lake storage earlier, I didn't specify some of the things I could have specified, because that by default allows me to pass parameters in, like the file, path, container. But other link services, you have to set up parameters. So, right, so I've basically configured this template. I've downloaded it from just GitHub. I've configured a link service for the ADLS and the REST API. Click on Use Template. And what it's actually done is it created me a pipeline in a folder. So earlier on I showed you can create folders. They are really good to make use of because you can cluster things together. And it could be that you have pipelines that run for HR, pipeline that run for sales, and maybe you cluster those together. Or it could be an individual, you get one for me, one for my business partner, and we just have our own in there. In that circumstance, I'd probably just have different data factories. But, folders can be used for whatever you want to use them for. So it creates a folder, it creates the pipeline, that shows you the recommended naming convention is actually a PL underscore on your pipelines. It just helps when you're looking at logs. If things are called PL or DS or LS, it's really easy to understand this is the thing that has gone wrong, as opposed to having to look around and see, well, what is that? Oh, it's a pipeline. So it's very good practice to give it good naming. And what Just does in his template is he creates a folder called generic. So if you've got data sets that are generic, i.e. you can pass parameters in and make them reusable, call them, put them in a folder called generic. If you've got something that's very specific, then maybe you create a folder for that specific system or setup, etc. So just to show you then, so we've created, there's a for each. So what you would have done is grab a for each here and bring it onto screen. And then you click on add to configure an activity, but that's already been done. So if you look at the pipeline itself, it has 3 parameters. So when you call this pipeline, you can define, actually, I want you to run, well, for this one, it's how many days backwards to go and get the REST API data for Power BI. You could say, actually, on the first run, I want you to go back 30 days because that's as much data as available. Or I'm trying to think of other circumstances. That's probably the best example. And I'm dynamically going to determine what storage account what container I'm going to put the data in, and what folder within the container I'm going to put the data in. So Justus configured it as raw and Power BI tenant. If I give you a quick look, there is no container called raw. Click on view all. There's no container called raw. So this will actually create it because it can, because we've configured it to allow that. Oh, it's on by default actually. So within the for each, we have certain settings as well. So we can run things sequentially. So 1, then 1, then 1. So don't parallelize. So that could be, or parallelize. I'm not sure how to say it. These are options you can set. So if your destination, or your source, either, if they can't handle doing multiple things at once, then click it, go sequential. And if you need to batch things up so that it does 2 max at a time or 3 max at a time, you can configure the maximum number of parallel runs. And what we're going to pass into, so for each, this was, we're passing in the parameter that's on the pipeline, and it's from 1 to however many days we pass in. So if we pass in 30, it will go day 1, day 2, day 3. It will iterate through. That's a nice, easy way of doing it. Right, and then there's activities. So if I click on, you can either click in here or click in here, and it's configured to copy data. The timeout's been left at 7 days. I would probably change that, although it'll fail way before that anyway. That's just if something is running for that amount of time. If it gets a fail message, it will just stop. And we mentioned the retry settings. We are going to go get it from the Power BI REST link service, the data set, which is connected to the link service. And what we're going to pass at runtime. So if we look at this data set that's been created, it's got a parameter, which is admin API. So you see everything's linked together. So this is the link service that's connected to this data set, and we want to pass it these values. Now, we don't actually have to because it's got defaults, but let's say you didn't put defaults. I don't know why you wouldn't, because then you wouldn't be able to test it. But yeah, so you can override the defaults here in the data set, and we're going to pass in so this parameter, which is defined admin API, it's going to be used here. So the relative URL for this data set is actually being passed in via the pipeline that's going to call it. So look. and it's here. So this is configured in the pipeline, and we're going to pass that to the data set. And the data set has parameters that's going to pass it to the link service. All feels a bit more complicated than it is, possibly my explanation, but it works. It's really good. And it's if you know anything about REST APIs, you can do different things. You can get, post. There's a couple of others I can't think of. So this one, we just want to get stuff. We have configured it to timeout, and the request interval is if you're going to request multiple things. So if it's paginated, for example, is how long to leave between that the next request. Right. So it is paginated, this data. So he has already configured this. So if you were configuring a REST API, you'd have to know what your pagination settings are, etc. But here's a nice, interesting piece. We've got additional columns. This is on the source. So our source data is going to come from this API. But what we're going to append onto that source data is, well, which ADF pipeline run ID was it? And when did that trigger? So now when we've got that data ready to put somewhere, we have those additional fields that we can put down wherever we're going to put the data down. So we're going to put the data down in Azure Data Lake, which is definitely recommended if you're doing a REST API, in fact, any API that gives you JSON output, because that output might change. And unless you land it as a one column in SQL Server, for example, if it changes, it might cause you problems. Whereas if you dump it to blob, if the schema evolves, it's fine. It's a new file; it doesn't care. There we go. And I don't think, if I remember, there's no mapping set up by default. So if you were going to SQL Server, you would definitely need to do mapping to try and pull stuff out of the JSON and put it somewhere. I would anyway. That's the other option. And you can set certain things like maximum number. So when you run pipelines, they consume data integration units. You can say what's the maximum. So by default, I think it's 8 by default. It says auto, but realistically, it's pretty much always 8. You can drop that down to 4. Makes it a little bit cheaper to run. It's not really a concern. It's it's $0.25 per hour's worth of usage. So it's not a lot of money. But if you're going to optimize, make sure you are aware of these things. And so if you do enable staging, that's what I mentioned. If it's a big data source, you can drop it in blob storage. If you can get it out faster than you can put it down, then it can make sense to actually temporarily put it in storage. It does mean you pay twice because you're doing a double hop, but it means you can get disconnected. So if you've only got maybe a 30-minute window to connect to the source system, you want to get everything out as quick as possible, then get it out, stick it on blob, and then take your time to process it if it does take longer. That's a strategy which I use quite a lot. And turn on your logging so you get better logging, and you can again store that down in ADLS, or you can configure Data Factory to store the data in logs, which you can then put dashboards over the top and things like that, which I would recommend. Right, that's it really. So for each day from 1 to 30, whatever you've been specified, we're going to go get data. We're going to pass in a certain value. So just to look, the start time uses that day to work out, because you have to pass the API a start time and an end time. So we just use, or just to set it up to take a day and do 24 hours. And it's a really easy way to do it. Just to show you what that the for each is actually being used for. And now, like I say, this is going to fail, and it's by design. This is showing you that, like, if I run this pipeline in debug, I get to choose what these parameters are. But if I was to run a pipeline that called this pipeline, I would set those. In fact, let me do that just to demo. So I'm going to make this simple pipeline. Let's delete that. And what I want to do is call this pipeline in that pipeline. Fairly easy to do. I'll just pull it down onto the screen. And I need to set certain settings. So you can see here, I mean, default is 1 raw Power BI to tenant, and I don't want to overwrite the default, so I'm just going to just do that. What's interesting, just to show you a quick thing, I could do this. So if I could do this and then this, so on success, do the next thing. Now, bad example because it's actually doing the same thing twice. But what I can do, I can set, where is it? Sorry. Wait on completion. So I can say, actually, don't move to the next until we know it's complete and worked. You can also set up, let's say, and these are just very quick demos. They're not really useful, other than there's 3 different things you can do when you're setting up your flows. There's 4 actually. I've never used the on skip, to be honest. And what I like to do is the auto align. It makes it look a bit prettier. Sort it out. So yeah, I can say that if this particular thing I've asked to do, if this pipeline succeeds, move to this one. Or actually, if this one doesn't succeed, I have something I want to do. Maybe that is send a Teams message or a Slack message or an email or a text message. And all those things are possible by integrating with other parts of Azure. So yeah, say if it fails, go and do this, please. Or I can say, look, whatever happens, I want you to go do this one. So what you might do in that circumstance, if you've got 5 things you want to do in sequence, but you don't actually care if one fails, you just need to move on to the next one, then you could use the blue arrow. So just go to the next one, whatever happens. Or if you didn't mind them both running concurrently, you could just do this, and then they would actually both run at the same time. So you have lots of flexibility. You can make things run one after the other, or make them run all at the same time. Yeah, so there's in your pipeline, if I've got 10 things, I can say, actually, I only want you to run at max 2 at a time, 3 at a time, 4 at a time. You have the flexibility. So let me just delete these. Right, so this one is going to call that, and it's actually going to fail. So let's run this. You can always click refresh. So this refreshes every couple of seconds. I generally sit here and click refresh because I'm impatient and I want to see what's going on. So this is going to Power BI, the REST API, and saying, can you give me the data? Okay. Oh yeah, so that called the pipeline, which it succeeded in calling the pipeline. This is the critical thing. So if I go into, so just to show you, this means when I ran the pipeline, these are the configuration, and what did it do? Well, it ran this pipeline. So I can click here and see this pipeline. Yeah, I'm sure I set this to fail, so my bad. Yeah, so it goes through, it copies data. I only set it for 1 day. So if I go across to here and refresh, you'll see it created a file for me, a container for me, and it created the folder, and within it we're storing activity events. You know, it's divided up by year, month, and then the files within, and it's named so it works essentially. So actually, because this is working, it was supposed to not work. My apologies. It's not often you get a demo that's designed to fail. What I will do instead, I will set it to run for 3 days. There we go. And what you'll see is, where are we? So this is calling the pipeline, and I'm telling the pipeline to, so I said 3 days, so you might expect this to show 3 times. It actually doesn't, because all we're doing, we're calling that pipeline once. Within the pipeline, so let me navigate to that now, we can see actually it ran 3 times. And if we go here, we can see it ran with the, where are we? Sorry. I'm trying to see the settings. There we go. No. This tells you how it ran. So the debug I was going to show you is this kind of thing anyway. So you can see it picked up those additional columns. I was trying to show you the, was it there? The item count 3, there you go. What I was trying to show you is actually it was configured to run with this time period, this time period, this time period. But it's created them. So if I go over here, click refresh, I've got 3 files and it's named them appropriately. So it's a real good, simple, so just awesome for providing this for everybody. But it shows it shows how it runs. What I wanted to, so I'm going to publish all these now. There we go. So publishing, making them available to other people, making it available to run on a scheduled basis. So you see all the, they had little indicators to say these are changed, not saved. They're now there. But if I look at monitor, critically what you might be confused by when you first go in is, well, I can't see anything that's run. Nothing's here. It's because they weren't triggered. Triggered is when something is done by either a schedule or by an activity. These were debug runs. So this is where you can see them. Over the last 24 hours. There, you can see when I tested it earlier, it did fail. So this one I want to show, well, I can show you this actually. So this is a good thing. I can show you the history. So a pipeline that has been debugged, you can go back in history. I think it's 30 days history, and then you can do a debug. So I can do things like, I can see what the error, so activity failed because an inner activity failed, because that itself failed because the thing it called failed. So let's go to that. Now that failed, and it happened because, it basically said the permissions weren't set up. I think what it was, when I set the permissions up, I didn't give it long enough to go all the way through the system. So it didn't have permission, now it does. So that's something to be aware of. When you set things up and you've set permissions, you might at first get error messages saying you're not, you don't have permission, even though you've set the permissions. So you sometimes just have to wait for the system to catch up, essentially. That can be really frustrating because you change a load of things trying to make the error go away, and actually the error was you just needed to wait a bit longer to run it. So that was the demo. Right, let's have a look. I'm going to power through because I think I'm overrunning a little bit on time. So they're the main features of Azure Data Factory. We've seen some demos. Let's go through best practices and optimization. They help you get the most out of ADF. So first, make extensive use of parameters in your pipelines. I've come into organizations who have hundreds of pipelines, hundreds of data sets, hundreds of linked services, and it just becomes really complicated trying to work out how to fix it or where to go. By having parameterized, there's a lot less things to have to wade through. So parameters allow you to create flexible, reusable pipelines. Instead of hard coding values like file names or database tables, use parameters. That way you can use the same pipeline for different scenarios just by changing the parameter value. Next, always implement proper error handling. I haven't shown that here, but definitely if on error, log it somewhere, or even on success, log it somewhere, because you might want to monitor that it was taking 5 seconds and now all of a sudden it's taken 5 minutes. If you don't log that, you're not going to know that unless you actually go and look. So log even your successes. This makes troubleshooting much more easy. So I tend to log my metadata from the ADF pipelines runs into an Azure SQL table, and I put a Power BI report over the top of it, so it's really easy. And then you can do things like take action. So if my Power BI looks at the log and I'm just looking for fails, if the fail count goes up by 1, then I can do some automation there to say, right, send an email to somebody. That's quite a nice, easy way of doing it. Or you can do logic apps to send emails, and there's various ways of doing things. When dealing with large data sets, use incremental loading where possible. So instead of copying an entire data set each time, only copy the data that has changed. it can massively reduce your processing time and your resource usage. So it's things like if you're getting data from a SQL table and there's a last updated column on it, if you store that, so when you do your pull of data, if you store in your log, well, what was the maximum value at that time, then on your next run, you can retrieve that and go, right, last time we ran data, it was up until Monday night. Now, for whatever reason, you haven't run it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So rather than configuring it to just run a day's worth of data, things happen. Sometimes networks go down, sometimes someone goes on holiday. If you configure it actually to say, right, run from the last time we ran, it will just self-heal or self-pick up the additional days of inactivity. So I find, that's a really good loading technique. The only thing you have to be very aware of is that column has to be dependable. So if you're coming from, if the data is coming from Azure SQL, where someone can just update data in the table and might not trigger the last updated column to update, then a strategy I quite often use, and by the way, everyone says that their last updated column is completely dependable, and everybody's wrong. It's not. It never is. There's always something that can change the data and not trigger the update column. I've just seen it far too many times. So what I tend to do is have a daily process that picks up the last day's worth of data, or an hour, or whatever it is, but then probably on a Saturday or Sunday, actually have a different pipeline that goes back and goes, get me the last 7 days of data, or get the full data on a Sunday, and then in SQL do a merge. So you pick up any changes that possibly you didn't pick up in the week. It just means that you do capture the ones that the system didn't tell you about. Everything's completely different circumstances, but that's one way of doing it. Pay attention to your data formats. For large-scale analytics workloads, columnar formats like Parquet can have massive, significant performance benefits over row-based formats like CSV. Parquet compresses for a start, but it's columnar as opposed to row level. There's lots of benefits for that. In terms of being able to do time travel is a feature. It's not necessarily a Parquet feature. It's Delta, out of scope for this chat, but Parquet is the one I always recommend because you can do things with it. Lastly, leverage your control flow activities for complex logic. Activities like the for each, the if condition, and the until, they allow you to create really sophisticated dynamic workflows that can handle a variety of scenarios. So if you know that sometimes you have a quirk, you can build that in and say, look, in the if condition, if we get data and it's significantly smaller than it usually is, you can do things like, well, right, let's send the message to someone, let's carry on. Or you can actually say, halt, that data doesn't look right. That's a good, interesting if condition. You can say, look, if the size is different to yesterday, then do something. Or if it's not, or the other way is actually saving yourself time and effort. If you're doing an iterative one, as an example, if you have an if condition that says that if your maximum date in the data set you've just pulled is the same as the maximum data as you pulled last time, then don't do anything with it. Save yourself time, money, processes. So only process it if something's changed. So you can use it for change detection. So those three are the core: for each, if, until. So remember, the best practices are not just about you making your pipelines run faster. They're about creating robust, maintainable solutions that can adapt to changing requirements, because an ADF failing can be a problem. But if you've designed it correctly so that people are notified at the right time, or it's got a failover that says, let's say you've got a replica on your SQL server, and for some reason you're trying to connect and you're not getting your data, ADF can handle that and go, look, we tried to connect to that, it's not there, let's go to the secondary replica and pull it from there instead. Instead of just failing, it can try and do other things. So that's what I would say to make most use of ADF. make it robust. There are tips and tricks you can use. Yeah, there we go. So I did have monitoring optimization, but I think I'm massively over time. We covered we should do custom logging anyway. I would say use Azure Monitor for alerting, so it can fire off something if the ADF run logs an error. Get Azure Monitor to do something, whether that's email, SMS, an Azure function, whatever. It's your first line of defense, I would say. The optimize your integration runtime settings. Just quickly, it can have a massive impact. So if you're doing a large number of small files, you want to increase the concurrent copies that the integration can handle. Or if you're doing massive big ones, then you can limit it to only do a certain amount. You can configure the integration runtime to have more resources on the source system, things like that. So, and last thing is when developing new pipelines, make extensive use of the debug mode. I've seen quite a lot of people build, publish, and it publishes, and they take that as great, it works. Not necessarily. It means that there's no problems in the setup, but it might not work. So always debug it. Don't publish till you've debugged it and proven it works. It allows you to see at each stage what's going on with your data, and you might decide actually that pipeline bogs down at a certain point, so I'm going to change that. So please debug and test your pipelines. It's a great way to iteratively develop. So the key takeaways, just going to wrap up the session and recap the key points. Azure Data Factory is a powerful tool for streamlining data integration. It provides a unified platform. You can do ingestion, prepare data, transform data, publish data, and it reduces the complexity of having multiple tools and processes to do that. You can have it all in one place. The visual tools, particularly the pipeline designer and the data flows, they can significantly reduce your development time. Those pipelines, but I didn't really mention it, make them reusable blocks. So if they're parameterized, get data from SQL Server and put it on a blob store, as an example. You can have that as a pipeline and just drag that into a larger process, configure which server, which database, what storage, what it's doing. You can do all that within the orchestration pipeline and just reuse. So rather than having a copy data or a for each or whatever in your orchestration, you just call a pipeline within a pipeline, and that just you can reuse blocks of routines essentially. It's massively scalable and flexible, whether you're dealing with small data sets or big data, on premises or cloud, batch or real time. ADF can handle it. One of its real strong points is its tight integration with the rest of the Azure ecosystem. So you can build end-to-end, really comprehensive things that leverage various Azure services. And although this is a talk about ADF, it isn't the answer to all things. Sometimes it's better to get ADF to call a logic app that processes certain data just because it's more efficient. It's a single call. Logic apps are cheaper to run. So don't think of it. It doesn't answer. It can answer all your problems, but it's not the optimal way to do it. It's really good at bringing together an optimal solution, is what I would say. And lastly, the importance of following best practices and implementing proper monitoring. Without monitoring, you can be in real trouble because if something fails and you don't know about it, I call them deadly fails, because an unknown failure, people make decisions on data they didn't know the data failed. That can be a problem. Usually not life-threatening, but it can be financially. So yeah, the best practices and monitoring is crucial for creating robust, maintainable solutions, and they can adapt to changing requirements and quickly recover from issues. You make them self-healing. That's the beauty. If someone always does something when something fails, great, code it in. I say code, it's not code. So I hope the session has given you a solid understanding of ADF, how it can benefit your data integration. Are there any questions before we wrap up? While you're thinking about that, I just want to show you the resources. So Azure Data Factory documentation, you can go on Microsoft and find those. Microsoft Learn modules, as you can see on ADF itself, it's got links to those Learn modules. And community forums and blogs are really good. So the official Data Factory documentation is a great starting point. I mean, it's comprehensive, it's updated all the time. It includes tutorials, how-to guides. Microsoft Learn is free structured learning paths. So if you prefer a structured way of learning, they're great. The interactive modules are great to get hands-on experience because you get a sandbox environment. So you can really play and figure things out. And don't underestimate the value of community forums and blogs. People post things which are super useful, and that's why I love the Azure community. It's really active, and they uniquely, I found a really good way of doing something. Here, have it. It's years of your knowledge, or maybe it took you days or weeks to figure something out, and they post it so other people can access it. It's absolutely amazing. I love our community. I've named two on screen, Catherine Wilhelmsen and Just Blindbeck. Just was where I got the Power BI REST API template from. He has some really good articles on how to actually make use of those. Yeah, so the ADF community is super active. Now, the last one, whilst it's called sqlcommunity.slack.com, that's misleading. It's not really SQL community. It's Microsoft community might be more accurate, but really it's just community of tech people who help each other. So it should really be called tech community. So if you go to sqlcommunity.slack.com, that won't let you in. You have to get a invite to get in. Weird, I know. So if you just Google SQL community, there's a really good post by Brent Ozar, and he posts the actual link to get the invite, and then you're in, and then you use Slack. You don't have to download something on your desktop. You can actually do it on any browser, and there is an Azure Data Factory channel in there. So you can ask questions, and super experienced people can help you, basically. So yeah, it's really good. Right, so I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about ADF, strategies, any topics we covered. While I might not have the answers, I'll do my best to provide guidance or point you towards the relevant resources. Has anyone got first question? Potentially win a prize.
Yeah, thank you, James. It's very interesting presentation, and also thank you. At the moment, there is no question, but Tanya, let me share you. It's a thanks about your demonstration. I think the best part of your presentation, it was demo. We have a two demonstrations. It was very great. Thanks again. And actually, other participants, if you have in the future, you have a question, you can connect with James in the LinkedIn or other social media. You can ask your question. I think.
So I've got that on my final slide, actually. So yeah, if you do think of something later, please reach out to me. My contact information is back on the screen. I hope you found the session informative. Thank you for your time, attention, and have the rest of a Saturday for me. I think it's Saturday for most people.
Yeah, sure. Thank you again. Have a good day and have the best weekend for all of the guys from everywhere. Thank you, James, again.
Bye. Thank you, Mason. Take care.